The stars were dying one by one, and Elder Mara could do nothing but watch. From her command center high above the planet Zelani Prime, she stared at the massive viewscreen showing what used to be the Kithra system. Now it was just empty black space where 5 beautiful worlds once orbited their sun. The Devourers had been there 3 days ago. Now there was nothing left but cosmic dust. Mara's old hands gripped the metal railing as another red light blinked on the galactic map. The Helix Nebula colonies had gone silent. That made 17 systems consumed in the past month. 17 entire civilizations erased from existence as if they had never been born. The Zelani Confederation had stood for over 2,000 years. 12 different alien species working together, sharing knowledge, building a better future among the stars. They had survived wars, plagues, and natural disasters. But nothing had prepared them for the Devourers. These mechanical monsters appeared from the void beyond known space like a plague of metal locusts. They stripped planets down to their core, consuming everything organic and inorganic alike. Their ships were massive geometric nightmares that bent space around them. Worse yet, they seemed to learn from every battle. Each time the Confederation fleets engaged them, the Devourers adapted their tactics and technology. Admiral Zenth of the Corvan Defense Fleet had thrown everything at them near the outer rim. 300 of the Confederation's finest warships had attacked a single Devourer mothership. Only 12 ships made it back, and Zenth wasn't among the survivors. The few pilots who escaped spoke of weapons that turned their own ships against them and boarding parties of mechanical creatures that could not be killed. Mara walked slowly through the command center, her 4 legs clicking against the polished floor. Around her, officers from different species worked frantically at their stations. The tall, blue-skinned Altarians managed communications while the smaller, furry Ketheri calculated supply routes. Everyone was doing their best, but fear hung in the air like a poisonous fog. Elder Mara, called Captain Vex, a young Zelani officer with green scales that had lost their shine from stress. "We're receiving the final transmissions from the Helix colonies. The evacuation ships, they didn't make it out in time." Mara closed her 3 eyes and said a silent prayer for the billions who had just perished. When she opened them again, she saw the same hopeless expression on every face in the room. They all knew the truth. The Confederation was losing this war badly. Their remaining fleets were scattered across 30 systems, trying to protect what was left. But the Devourers moved too fast and hit too hard. For every enemy ship they destroyed, 5 more appeared to take its place. It was like fighting the tide itself. That night, while her officers tried to get some rest, Mara descended into the deepest levels of the Capitol building. Down here, in archives that hadn't been disturbed for centuries, lay the oldest records of the Confederation. Ancient data crystals and stone tablets from the first days when the species had made contact with each other. She searched through dusty files and forgotten databases, looking for anything that might help. Old weapons designs, forgotten allies, emergency protocols that no one remembered. Her 3 eyes burned from strain, but she kept reading by the dim light of the archive chambers. Then she found it, buried in a file marked Theoretical Emergency Measures. It was a beacon design, something created by the founders of the Confederation but never used. The documentation was incomplete, written in an old dialect that was hard to understand. But one thing was clear, this beacon could send a signal farther than any communication device they had ever built. The most interesting part was a small note written by hand scribe Kella, one of the founding members of the Confederation. She had written about rumors and stories from deep space traders. Tales of a species that lived beyond the galactic rim, in sectors that no Confederation ship had ever reached. They were called humans, and the stories about them were strange. Some traders claimed these humans were fierce warriors who had fought wars across multiple star systems. Others said they were builders and explorers who could adapt to any environment. A few mentioned that they had powerful fleets hidden somewhere in the darkness between galaxies. Most dismissed these stories as space myths, the kind of tales that grew bigger with each telling. But hand scribe Kella had believed there might be truth in the legends. She had designed the emergency beacon with one purpose, to reach out to these mysterious humans if the Confederation ever faced total destruction. Mara's hands shook as she read the final instructions. The beacon would drain the power from half the planet to send its signal. It could only be used once, and there was no guarantee anyone would hear it or respond. It was a desperate gamble based on old stories and fading hope. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Captain Jake Morrison was having his morning coffee when the universe changed forever. The USS Ranger drifted silently through the Kepler void, a region of space so empty that most star maps didn't even bother marking it. Jake liked these quiet patrols. After 20 years in the Earth Defense Fleet, he appreciated the peace and quiet of deep space. The Ranger was humanity's most advanced scout ship, packed with sensors that could detect a whisper from 3 star systems away. Jake's crew of 12 specialists spent their days monitoring subspace frequencies and mapping unknown sectors. It wasn't glamorous work, but someone had to watch the dark corners of the galaxy. Lieutenant Beth Parker was running the night shift communications when her equipment started going crazy. "Captain Morrison to the bridge, please. We're picking up something really strange out here." Jake set down his coffee and made his way to the bridge. Beth was hunched over her console, her face lit by dozens of blinking lights and scrolling data streams. Her usually neat ponytail was falling apart from running her hands through her hair. "What do you have for me, Parker?" Jake asked, settling into his command chair. "Sir, we just intercepted a transmission unlike anything I've ever seen. It's coming from way outside our patrol zone, maybe 50,000 light-years beyond the galactic rim. The signal is incredibly powerful, like someone used half a planet's energy grid just to send it." Jake frowned. 50,000 light-years was far beyond any known human settlement. Could it be one of our deep exploration missions? No, sir. The encryption patterns are completely alien. But here's the weird part, whoever sent this signal knows about us. They're calling specifically for humans by name. The captain felt a chill run down his spine. For the past 100 years, humanity had followed a strict isolation policy. After the disaster at Proxima Centauri, where human contact with aliens had led to a devastating war, Earth's leaders had decided to keep humanity hidden from the rest of the galaxy. They built their colonies in empty sectors, used stealth technology on their ships, and avoided all contact with other species. "Run it through the translation matrix," Jake ordered. "Let's see what they're saying." The ship's quantum computers worked for several minutes, analyzing the signal structure and attempting to decode its meaning. When the translation finally appeared on the main screen, the bridge fell silent. "We are the Zalani Confederation, an alliance of 12 species. We are under attack by an enemy called the Devourers. They have consumed 17 of our star systems. Billions are dead. Our fleets are broken. We are dying. Ancient records speak of warriors called humans who dwell beyond the rim. Please, if you exist, if you can hear this message, help us. We have nowhere else to turn. This is our final plea before the darkness takes us all." Jake stared at the words for a long time. Behind him, his crew exchanged worried glances. They had all heard stories about the Proxima incident, how humanity's first attempt at galactic diplomacy had ended in bloodshed and betrayal. That's why they stayed hidden now, keeping to themselves in the empty spaces between more populated regions. "Parker, send a priority burst transmission to Terra Command. Mark it for Admiral Sullivan's eyes only. Include the full alien message and our current position." Jake paused, thinking about the implications. "And Parker? Use the emergency channels. They need to see this immediately." 3 days later, Jake found himself standing in the war room beneath the Rocky Mountains on Earth. Terra Command was humanity's most secure facility, carved deep into solid rock and shielded from every form of detection. The room was filled with the most powerful people in human space, admirals, generals, and government leaders who made decisions that affected billions of human lives. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood at the head of the massive table, her gray hair pulled back in a military bun. She was a legend in the fleet, the woman who had rebuilt humanity's navy after the Proxima disaster. Everyone in the room respected her, but they didn't always agree with her decisions. "We all heard Captain Morrison's report," she said, her voice carrying easily through the room. "An alien confederation is asking for our help against something called the Devourers. They know we exist, and they're desperate enough to send a signal that probably drained half their remaining resources." General Bobby Roberts, a large man with a thick mustache, stood up from his chair. "Admiral, with respect, this sounds exactly like what happened at Proxima. An alien species contacts us, asks for help, and then we find ourselves in a war that costs millions of human lives. We made a promise after that disaster, never again." Several other officials nodded in agreement. The Proxima incident was still fresh in everyone's memory, even after 100 years. An alien race called the Hegemony had contacted Earth, claiming they needed help against pirates and raiders. When humanity sent a fleet to assist, they discovered the Hegemony had lied about everything. The pirates were actually refugees, and the Hegemony were the aggressors. By the time humanity realized the truth, they were trapped in a three-way war that devastated human colonies for decades. "I understand the concern," Admiral Sullivan replied. "But this situation is different. These aliens aren't asking us to take sides in their war. They're facing extinction from an outside force. And according to our analysis of their signal, they're telling the truth about the scope of the threat." A young intelligence officer named Dr. Chris Hall stood up from his seat near the back. "Admiral, our computers have been analyzing the energy signatures in that transmission. Whatever these devourers are, they're using technology we've never seen before. The destruction patterns described in the alien message suggest weapons that can actually consume matter and energy, converting entire planets into raw materials." The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed this information. General Roberts crossed his arms over his chest. "So we're supposed to risk human lives fighting some unknown enemy just because aliens asked us to? That's not our problem." Admiral Sullivan's eyes flashed with anger. "Since when do we abandon innocents to die? That's never been the human way. We didn't build the greatest fleet in the galaxy just to hide in the shadows while entire civilizations get wiped out. The sanctuary system was dying when the impossible happened." Elder Mara watched from her command ship as the last 3 worlds of her people burned under Devourer assault. Massive mechanical ships, each one the size of a small moon, hung in space like dark metal spiders spinning webs of destruction. Green energy beams cut through the planet's atmosphere, harvesting everything they touched. The remaining Confederation fleet was scattered and broken. Only 47 ships still fought, their crews exhausted from weeks of running battles. Captain Vex's destroyer limped through space on emergency power, its hull cracked open like an egg. The Altarian cruiser Starwind had lost half its crew, while the Ketheri fighters buzzed around the giant Devourer vessels like angry insects, too small to do real damage but too fast to be easily swatted. "Elder Mara," Captain Vex called over the comm, his voice strained with exhaustion. "Long-range sensors are picking up massive energy readings at the edge of the system. Something big is coming through subspace." Mara's 3 eyes focused on her tactical display. The readings made no sense. It looked like someone was tearing holes in space itself, creating artificial wormholes that shouldn't be possible with any known technology. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the Confederation databases. Then space exploded with light. Brilliant white tears opened in the fabric of reality, each one perfectly round and crackling with power. They appeared all across the outer edge of the system, dozens of them opening at the same time. The Devourer ships immediately turned their attention toward these new arrivals, their mechanical minds recognizing a potential threat. What came through those rifts changed everything. The first ship to emerge was massive, easily twice the size of the largest Confederation battleship. Its hull was a sleek dark gray that seemed to absorb light, and it moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so huge. Strange blue lights pulsed along its sides in patterns that hurt to look at directly. But it wasn't alone. More ships poured through the quantum gates, and they kept coming. Sleek destroyers that looked like metal daggers cutting through space. Heavy cruisers bristling with weapon ports and sensor arrays. Massive carriers that launched swarms of fighters even as they entered normal space. And more of those giant battleships, each one a monument to engineering and military might. Commander Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of her destroyer, the USS Tempest, and watched the largest fleet she had ever seen take formation around them. 300 human warships had answered the alien distress call, pulled from secret bases scattered across 50 star systems. For over a century, humanity had been building and preparing in the shadows. Now the galaxy would see what they had accomplished. The flagship led the formation, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed every other ship in the system. Admiral Sullivan's voice cut through the chaos on all frequencies, speaking in clear, calm tones that somehow reached every ship in both fleets. This is Admiral Kate Sullivan of the Terran Defense Fleet to all Confederation vessels. We received your distress call. We're here to help. All friendly ships move to defensive positions behind our formation. We'll handle the rest. Elder Mara couldn't believe what she was seeing. The mythical humans were real, and they had brought a fleet that looked like it could conquer half the galaxy. Their ships moved in perfect formation, each one knowing exactly where it needed to be. It was like watching a deadly dance performed by masters who had practiced for lifetimes. The Devourer response was immediate and brutal. The mechanical ships turned their massive bulk toward the human fleet and opened fire with everything they had. Green energy beams thick as city blocks lanced through space, while swarms of mechanical fighters poured from launch bays like angry metal wasps. But the humans were ready. Admiral Sullivan's voice rang out across the fleet channels. All ships, show them why humanity endures. Fire when ready. The first human volley lit up the darkness like a newborn star. Hundreds of plasma cannons fired at once, sending brilliant blue-white bolts of superheated matter streaking toward the Devourer ships. Missile swarms followed, thousands of smart warheads that twisted and dodged through space to find their targets. And then came weapons the Confederation had never seen before, beams of pure energy that seemed to bend space around them, and projectiles that moved faster than light itself. The leading Devourer mothership, a thing of dark metal and cruel angles that had been harvesting the third planet, suddenly found its shields overwhelmed. Human weapons struck its hull with surgical precision, targeting weak points and critical systems that no one should have been able to identify. Explosions bloomed across its surface like deadly flowers. Commander Hayes watched from her bridge as her destroyer's weapons found their mark on a smaller Devourer cruiser. Direct hit on Target 7. Their shields are fluctuating. Firing again. All around the system, human ships engaged the enemy with a coordination that seemed impossible. They moved like parts of a single organism, covering each other's weaknesses and concentrating fire on priority targets. When Devourer fighters tried to swarm the human formation, Earth's own fighters met them head-on in a spectacular light show of explosions and laser fire. The mechanical enemies had dominated every battle for months, learning and adapting to everything the Confederation threw at them. But they had never faced humans before. They had never encountered weapons designed by species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of war against their own kind. And they had certainly never met pilots who viewed impossible odds as just another day at the office. Within minutes, the tide of battle had completely reversed. The Devourer ships that had been methodically destroying the sanctuary systems suddenly found themselves under assault by forces they couldn't understand or predict. Their adaptive algorithms struggled to process human tactics that seemed to change every few seconds. Elder Mara watched in amazement as the human fleet carved through enemy formations like a hot knife through ice. These weren't just warriors, they were artists of destruction, turning battle into a form of deadly poetry that left their enemies scattered and burning in the void. The battle had been raging for 3 days straight, and the humans were fighting like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Elder Mara watched from her command ship as Captain Tom Bradley's fighter squadron screamed through space toward a massive Devourer mothership. Half his pilots were flying damaged craft held together by emergency patches and prayer, but they never hesitated for a second. "Phoenix Squadron, this is Bradley," his voice crackled over the comm, "We're going in hot. Remember, we're not trying to win this fight, we're buying time for those evacuation ships to get clear." Mara's three eyes widened as she watched the human fighters dive straight into the enemy's defensive fire. Devourer point defense systems filled space with deadly energy bolts, but the humans twisted and rolled through the barrage like they were dancing with death itself. Two fighters exploded in brilliant flashes, but the rest kept coming. What happened next made no sense to any military doctrine Mara had ever studied. Instead of trying to destroy the Devourer ship, the human fighters began targeting its sensor arrays and communication systems. They weren't going for the kill, they were trying to blind and confuse the massive vessel. "I don't understand," Captain Vex said from his damaged destroyer. "Why aren't they attacking the main weapons? They could cripple that ship." But Mara was beginning to see the pattern. The humans weren't fighting like any species she had encountered. Every other race in the galaxy fought for victory, honor, or survival. Humans seemed to fight for something completely different. On the other side of the system, Major Amy Foster was leading a boarding party into the belly of a Devourer cruiser. Her Marines had blasted through the enemy hull using shaped charges, and now they were fighting room by room through corridors filled with mechanical horrors. "Foster to Fleet Command," she reported while ducking behind cover as energy bolts sizzled overhead. "We've secured the main computer core. Uploading virus package now." The virus was pure human innovation, a piece of code designed not to destroy the Devourer systems, but to confuse them. It made their targeting computers think friendly ships were enemies, and enemy ships were asteroids. It was psychological warfare applied to machines, something that shouldn't have been possible. But the most shocking display came from Commander Ryan Clark aboard the heavy cruiser Wolverine. His ship had taken massive damage during the first day of fighting. The main engines were dead, life support was failing, and half his crew was injured. Any reasonable commander would have ordered an evacuation. Instead, Clark did something that made Elder Mara question everything she thought she knew about warfare. "All ships, this is Commander Clark," his voice was calm despite the chaos around him. "Wolverine is no longer combat effective, but we're not done yet. We've got 3 Confederation evacuation ships trapped near the 4th planet, and a Devourer battleship moving to intercept them." Mara pulled up the tactical display and felt her heart sink. The evacuation ships were carrying over 50,000 civilian refugees, families, children, elderly beings who had survived the destruction of their homeworlds. They were slow, unarmed transports that couldn't possibly outrun or outfight a Devourer battleship. "Wolverine to evacuation convoy," Clark continued. "We're going to buy you some time. Get those people to safety." What happened next became legend throughout the Confederation for generations to come. The crippled human cruiser, trailing debris and venting atmosphere, turned toward the massive Devourer battleship and accelerated on emergency power. Clark was using his dying ship as a guided missile, aiming directly for the enemy vessel's command section. The Devourer ship tried to destroy the approaching cruiser, but Clark's crew had rerouted all remaining power to the forward shields. The Wolverine absorbed hit after hit, its hull glowing red-hot from energy impacts, but it kept coming. "Sir," one of Clark's officers called out, "we can still evacuate. The escape pods are ready." "Negative," Clark replied without hesitation. "Those civilian ships need every second we can give them. All hands, brace for impact." The collision was visible from across the entire system. The Wolverine struck the Devourer battleship at nearly a quarter of light speed, punching through its shields and armor like they were made of paper. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire that briefly outshone the local sun. But the evacuation ships escaped. 50,000 innocent lives were saved because one human commander decided that their survival was worth more than his own. Elder Mara found herself trembling as she watched the aftermath. The Devourers had encountered dozens of species during their invasion of Confederation space. They had faced warriors who fought with honor, tacticians who fought with skill, and desperate defenders who fought with everything they had. But they had never encountered anything like humanity. Captain Bradley's fighters weren't trying to score glorious victories, they were creating chaos to help others escape. Major Foster's Marines weren't capturing enemy ships for strategic advantage, they were disrupting Devourer communications to protect civilian evacuations. Commander Clark hadn't sacrificed his ship for military glory, he had traded his life and the lives of his crew to save people he had never met. They don't fight like soldiers, Mara whispered to herself as she watched more human ships engage the enemy. They fight like guardians. The Devourers had built their entire strategy around analyzing enemy behavior and adapting to it. Their mechanical minds could process any military doctrine, learn from any tactical approach, and counter any weapon system given enough time. But how do you adapt to an enemy that doesn't care about winning? How do you counter tactics that prioritize saving strangers over achieving victory? How do you fight beings who view their own lives as acceptable losses if it means others can live? Across the battlefield, human ships were pulling off maneuvers that made no strategic sense but perfect humanitarian sense. Destroyers used themselves as shields to protect alien medical ships. Cruisers diverted from high-value targets to rescue stranded fighter pilots from both sides. Heavy battleships focused their fire on Devourer vessels that were threatening civilian installations rather than going after the enemy command ships. The mechanical invaders learned too late that they weren't fighting an army, they were fighting an entire species that had decided others were worth dying for. And that was something no amount of adaptation could overcome. The silence after the battle was almost harder to bear than the fighting itself. Where once space had been filled with the deadly light of energy weapons and the roar of engines, now there was only the quiet hum of rescue operations and the distant glow of burning Devourer wreckage. Admiral Sullivan stood on the observation deck of her flagship, the Defiance, and watched the cleanup effort spread across the sanctuary system. Human and alien ships worked side by side, pulling survivors from damaged vessels and beginning the long process of rebuilding what had been destroyed. The great Devourer motherships that had terrorized the galaxy for months now drifted as empty hulks, their mechanical crews either destroyed or fled into the dark spaces between stars. The cost had been enormous. Humanity had lost 43 ships and over 12,000 brave men and women. The Confederation's losses were even higher, entire fleets wiped out, whole planets reduced to ash, billions of innocent lives lost before the humans could arrive. But somehow, impossibly, they had won. Elder Mara arrived on the Defiance 3 hours after the last Devourer ship had vanished into hyperspace. The old alien leader moved slowly through the human corridors, her 4 legs clicking softly on the metal deck plates. She had never been aboard a human vessel before, and everything seemed strange and unfamiliar. The walls were covered with images of blue skies and green forests, scenes from a world she had never seen but somehow found beautiful. When she finally reached the observation deck, she found Admiral Sullivan still standing at the massive viewport, watching the recovery operations. The human woman looked tired beyond measure. Her gray hair had come loose from its military bun, and there were dark circles under her eyes from days without sleep. "Admiral," Mara said softly, not wanting to disturb the moment. Sullivan turned and offered a weary smile. "Elder Mara. I'm glad you made it through safely. Your people fought with incredible courage." The two leaders stood together in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching as human medical ships docked with damaged Confederation vessels. Rescue teams were working around the clock to save everyone they could, regardless of species or allegiance. It was a sight that filled both women with a mixture of hope and sadness. Finally, Mara spoke the question that had been burning in her mind since the first human ships appeared. "Why did you come? Your people could have ignored our signal and remained hidden. You could have let us face extinction alone and stayed safe in your secret colonies. Why risk everything for strangers you had never met?" Admiral Sullivan was quiet for a long time, choosing her words carefully. She thought about the debates in Terra Command, the arguments about isolation and the lessons of Proxima Centauri. She remembered the faces of her officers when they learned about the Confederation's desperate situation, and the way they had volunteered without hesitation for a mission that might not bring any of them home. "Because that's what humans do," she said finally. "We heard you calling for help, and we couldn't turn away. It doesn't matter that we didn't know you, or that helping you meant revealing ourselves to the galaxy. When someone cries out in the darkness, we answer. Mara's three eyes studied the human admiral's face, searching for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. She had dealt with politicians and military leaders from a dozen different species, and most of them had ulterior motives for their actions. But all she saw in Sullivan's expression was honest exhaustion and genuine concern for others. Your people fought like nothing we have ever seen, Mara continued. Not for glory or conquest, but for lives you had never met. Commander Clark sacrificed his entire ship just to save our evacuation transports. Captain Bradley's pilots threw themselves at impossible odds to buy time for civilian rescues. I have studied warfare for over 2 centuries, and I have never encountered anything like it. Sullivan nodded, remembering the reports from the battle. The casualty lists were long, but every single loss had meaning. Every human who died had given their life so that others could live, alien others who would never even know their names. We learned something important during our own wars, Sullivan explained. Victory doesn't mean much if you lose your soul winning it. The only battles worth fighting are the ones where you're protecting something more important than yourself. As they spoke, the work of rebuilding continued all around them. Colonel Danny Price was already establishing the first joint defense station in the asteroid belt, a combined human-alien facility that would serve as an early warning system against future threats. His engineering teams worked alongside Zilani technicians and Altarian computer specialists, sharing knowledge and building something new together. Down in the medical bays, Dr. Rebecca Stone was introducing human healing technology to alien physicians. The techniques were revolutionary: nanobots that could repair cellular damage, genetic therapies that could regrow lost limbs, and surgical procedures that seemed like magic to species that had never encountered such advanced medicine. But Dr. Stone shared it all freely, asking for nothing in return except the chance to learn from alien medical traditions in exchange. The integration wasn't without its challenges. Human and alien technologies didn't always work well together, and there were language barriers that made communication difficult. But everyone involved was determined to make it work. They had seen what they could accomplish when they fought together, and now they wanted to see what they could build together. Within weeks, the first joint patrol ships were launching from the new defense stations. Human destroyers flew alongside Kethari fighters and Zilani cruisers, their crews learning to work as a unified force. The patrol routes extended far beyond Confederation space, reaching into the dark regions where the Devourers had fled. The message was clear to anyone watching: the galaxy was no longer undefended. Humanity had emerged from the shadows, and they had no intention of going back into hiding. They would stand guard, watching for threats and protecting those who could not protect themselves. Elder Mara established a permanent embassy aboard the human space station Unity, becoming the first alien diplomat to live among humans since the Proxima incident. She spent her days learning about human culture and sharing Confederation knowledge with her new allies. It was the beginning of something unprecedented, a true partnership between species based on mutual respect and shared values. The beacon that had called for help in the darkest hour had done more than summon humanity's fleet. It had awakened Earth's children to their true destiny among the stars, not as conquerors or explorers, but as guardians who would always answer when hope seemed lost.